Well, baby, you've been on my mind. I think about you all the time. Oh, I want to see your face. That don't make me wait.
All right, so I have to make a couple announcements up front before we get going. If you notice, we are still in the AC Hotel here in beautiful Austin, Texas. It is the AC Hotel Hill Country, who again is housing us. This is going to be our very first episode of kind of a new direction we're going in. And if you could see, I didn't want to be the one to tell everybody, but Brandon has gone through a tremendous transformation in the last couple months. And so,
I'm glad you recognize that.
No, actually,
this wasn't cheap.
Actually, this is Dr. Ann Morse, who will now be my co-host of Sleeping Around the Podcast. Dr. Brandon Hedgecock is still part of Sleeping Around the Podcast. Brandon has gotten extremely busy and some amazing things happening in his life that he will share with you guys. One that we've already talked about is he's engaged. He's going to be building a house. He's been traveling all over the country and in Canada, and he is just extremely busy. And so I said I want to continue to push on. And so right now with Handsome Dan behind the camera, this is going to be the new Sleeping Around the Podcast. So everybody out there who is listening and definitely who is watching, you will see that this is Dr. Ann Morse, who has become my friend.
Yes, my sleep friend.
That's right, my sleep friend. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background, and you can introduce the guest, but this is how it's going to work. It's going to be the same podcast. It's going to be fun. Ann is going to class up this joint. Yes.
Maybe just a little bit better, though?
Way better. Way better. So I am so excited. So Dr. Ann and I met in Charlotte last year at AASM, and we just clicked right away. Your energy is infectious, but your brain and what you've done in your career so far is just so inspiring. And I got to hear you give a talk for Jazz Pharmaceutical, and I said, I got to talk to this person. I wanted you on as a guest. We became friends. We started contacting each other, and we share some passions. One of Ann's passions that she'll share with you is her shoes, which are on point as always. But Ann, I'm just honored that you would be part of this, and just tell our audience a little bit about you, and you can make fun of me if you want.
Well, there's no reason to make fun of you.
Okay.
This is 100% a absolute privilege for myself, because I think as we've developed a relationship, we definitely have identified so many synergies. I think that the enthusiasm and the passion that we share around sleep medicine is contagious.
Right.
I mean, that's the reality. And the part that I think is so exciting is that when you're in the sleep field, you meet a lot of people who are excited about sleep for the sake of sleep, right?
True.
You and I share the same vision that sleep is so intimately involved in everything, right? And so when we're talking about Sleep Around a Podcast and we're talking about what is that shift that we're expected to see, we're moving into saying, how can we talk about sleep, not for the sake of sleep, because no one cares, right?
Right.
In 2014, the CDC said that. No one cares, right? Because we're in a major public health crisis because we're seeing epidemic proportions of sleep disorders amongst our adults. And now we're even seeing it in our kids, right?
100%.
And so we need to talk about sleep in other capacities. We're going to talk about it in terms of sleep and culture, sleep and lifestyle, sleep and wellness. How can we utilize it as the tool that it's intended to be? And so for me, as a neurologist and sleep medicine specialist, this is exactly where I need to be. Using this as my pulpit, right?
Yep.
To be able
Well,
to...
I would say platform, but I would say platform, man.
All right, my platform.
Yes.
In order to be able to kind of share that message and be able to bring on amazing guests like we have today, Judi Profant, who I'm actually very excited about because of the fact that she's known me since my sleep infancy. She actually kind of pulled me from down below and was like, we're going to give you a voice, right? We recognize you have a little bit of a different vision. And so we met when I was in sleep medicine fellowship.
Have you always been this introverted and shy?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, my parents were very worried about me. They actually wanted me to see a specialist in order to be able to come out of my shell a little bit. Yeah, I know.
It worked.
No, unfortunately, ever since I was a little kid, my parents had received report cards that said, Amory doesn't stop talking. She gets out of her seat, walks out of the classroom. She sharpens her pencil 32 times a day. She does the kids next to her work, so she has
Okay,
someone
hold
to
on. We
speak
were
to.
together on all that, except I could tell you're way smarter than me, both you guys already, so I'm already intimidated. But I definitely am just grateful. And I definitely want you to talk about Dr. Judi and y'all's relationship. And you came all the way from where?
Well, I came from California.
That's still far. As long as we're in Texas, so it's a little. All you California people are coming over here, but you are originally Hawaii, correct? Am I saying that?
So originally I'm from California, but I
Okay.
now split my time
From?
between Maui and Healdsburg, California.
Okay.
So, an island and wine country.
Well, so you live the life, is what you're saying.
I mean, I've worked hard to have this option.
Well, I'm going to turn it over, Ann. Let's do some interviewing, and we're excited. And Handsome Dan, just say hey into the mic. Say hey into the mic.
I don't have a mic.
Oh, Dan is there, everybody.
You turn that to it's going to pick you up from the top of it. So make
Yeah.
sure the drawing's not-
Yeah, so right in the top.
Right
Just
here?
the top.
Is
All right.
this good? Okay.
All right, guys, let's jump into it, guys.
Okay. So as I was mentioning, Judi and I met when I was a sleep medicine fellow at Montefiore. And I always tell people that a part of my kind of career trajectory is that I had never, ever imagined myself being in academic medicine. I'm the only doctor in my family. I lived in central New Jersey growing up. And my idea of a doctor was private practice, right? So that's what
Right.
I thought I was getting myself into.
Right.
And my husband will still stake the claim that that's what I told him in the first year that we met and holds that against me sometimes. Now, with that stated, when I went to Montefiore, there was a clinical trial going on at that time. It was Jazz Pharmaceuticals doing a clinical trial on Xyrem in pediatric narcolepsy. And so it was under the guidance of Dr. Michael Thorpe, who is a mentor for me and obviously a world-renowned expert in central disorders of hypersomnolence like narcolepsy. And he goes, "You're going to be my sub-investigator on this study, and we have our one patient." And that's good. And I said, "Dr. Thorpe, I'm a pediatric neurologist. Like, I can do this." So we ended up having actually 5 to 6 patients in the study.
That's a good.
Yeah, it
That's a good
was
amount.
it was actually very good. It gave me a tremendous exposure and experience, and obviously has led me to this path in my career. But what was most striking about this journey was the fact that I got to meet someone like Judi Profant, and so Judi, again, handpicked me and said, "You have something that should be shared." And I remember I was only a sleep fellow, right? Sleep fellows, we're kind of low man on the totem pole.
Right.
But she introduced me to opportunities of how can I actually use my voice to be able to advocate for patients, be able to shape the field, and even start thinking about, are we studying the right things? And so, Judi, I don't know if you remember things differently.
Well, no,
or,
that's what I was definitely going to say, Judi. I want to get your point of view from the shy person next to me. How did that go, Dr. Judi?
So at the time, I was a medical director at Jazz, and I'll say a little bit about my experience with that. So as the medical director, part of my role was to interact with our clinical study investigators. And, we were trying to get Xyrem, this medication that's indicated for the treatment of narcolepsy.
Thank you for saying that, because remember, everybody who watches this probably doesn't know. So
Right.
thank you.
And the active molecule in Xyrem is GHB, basically.
Oh,
and
wow.
so, we had to really be diligent about conducting the study and, giving this medication to children and, only to children who really had a debilitating neurologic disorder and needed treatment, right? But so it was challenging recruiting patients and working with investigators and really making sure all the, parents understood the process and the children were safe and,
Right.
the medication was being well studied. And so I was really interested when I noticed an investigator who was really thoughtful in their approach to research. I also was at the point in my career and in my life where I could really pick people out, right? Where I saw something where someone had enthusiasm and energy and the wherewithal to really make a difference. So I think I would tell a similar story, right? That I saw Anne and thought, okay,
This is the right person.
we need to get her more involved.
And
Not
what,
just
what year was this? Because right now we're in
my
2023.
goodness.
See what I did there, Dan? I remembered time continuum. Right?
Yep.
We're doing good.
So I was a fellow in 2016, 2015 to 2016. So it was in that time frame.
Tell us about your background a little bit. Before, can we jump back?
Of course.
We'll probably start like when you're 9 and just go.
Well,
No,
so
I'm kidding.
Well, so I will say that my parents never had to get me out of my shell either. And I actually did do the work of the child sitting next to me, but I had a twin brother. And so,
Why couldn't I have gone to school with you late? Well, number one, I'm way older, but if I would have, I would have been held back, but could have had y'all do my work for me, but go ahead. No, tell us a little bit about you.
So I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, but my PhD is in what's called behavioral medicine. So kind of the interplay between psychology and medicine. So I've always been interested in the interactions between behavior and medical disorders and wellness and health outcomes. And I am a little bit older than Anne. And so the year that I started my PhD program, a number of clock genes were identified.
Okay.
So sleep became this whole different thing, right? So we now understood more of kind of the genetic underpinnings of things like circadian rhythms and, you know, whether people can adjust to different sleep schedules and travel across time zones and all of those things. And, you know, people who have trouble falling asleep or waking up in the morning and people who are, you know, what we call phase shifted. We now started to understand the genetics behind that.
And I think it's important because, again, thinking of our audience who may have a varied background, when we're talking about clock genes, this is the part that is fascinating to me because whenever we're talking about how our body and how we perceive our day-night rhythms, what we call the circadian rhythm, I can say as a doctor in medical school, we still get trained. Your circadian rhythm is due to my eye seeing light, telling me what is day, what is night. And it is going to say, hi, eye, I'm going to talk to your suprachiasmatic nuclei and then tell the pineal gland to produce melatonin, right? And that's how I know whether it's day or night. The reality is that these discoveries were so monumental that the researchers who identified them got the Nobel Prize in 2017, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
And the part that is so amazing about this is that every single cell in your body has a clock gene. And so when you actually map out the circadian pattern or your day-night pattern of every cellular activity in your body, there is a circadian pattern to it. And then when you overlay on it disease processes, you can see how it corresponds.
Wow.
So for instance, in the early morning, you'll see a lot of the mechanisms that your body naturally is doing, like increasing your blood viscosity, increasing your blood pressure, increasing the likelihood of platelets, which is a type of blood cell, sticking together. That's in your early morning hours. You overlay disease processes, and you know what actually occurs at that same exact time? Your highest likelihood of a heart attack,
I was going to say,
of a stroke,
cardiovascular.
Exactly. And so in medicine, we neglect this all the time. And so having people like Judi who's going, I need to understand this because what are the behaviors that are being the opposite of what we're genetically driven to do is 100% an area that we need to move, but we completely neglect this.
I'm fascinated. Dr. Judi, I know this is going to surprise you, but I have my undergrad in psychology, my master's in psychology, and I also was going to go for my PhD at Ole Miss. My passion was, my mom was a diagnostician, and I had this a theory about night terrors. And so in the early 90s, I'd watched a film in one of my psychology classes that just blew me away. So that was kind of my introduction to kind of what sleep was. But to see where it's go, I'm almost 50, to see where it's come all these years, because it's like, that's what I wanted to do. And back then I was like, how do I help people sleep better with counseling, or how do I help them in therapy and in medicines and stuff? So to see where we've come in such a short time, because nowadays everything's about sleep. I mean, the industry itself is, they say this next couple of years is a $5 billion. I mean, people actually do podcasts on sleep. And so I just think that it's great. I'm curious, did you always have a passion for it, or did you just stumble into it?
So I'll tell you, I was always interested in disease and behavior, like I said.
Okay.
But my research prior to graduate school was in, cardiovascular disease, was in cancer. And I was really interested in, stress and these kind of predisposing factors, right? So we all have a genetics, right? And then the history of our lives, right? Both, medically and emotionally, right? And the behaviors that we learn and the things that we're willing to participate in, right? And it really was kind of at the crux of that. So sleep is really important in cardiovascular disease. So I was aware of that. I actually, when I left doing research with my undergrad mentors and then started researching graduate school, thank God, I said, hey, put some actigraphs on them. Like, don't just do all the impedance cardiography and everything. Don't just, measure the heart rate and blood pressure, but, get their what's called actigraphy. So, movement.
Yeah.
And it's a rough measure of sleep and wake.
Yeah. It's exactly what we're seeing a lot of people measuring now, right? They're wearing Fitbits or Apple Watches or rings or the Whoop or whatever it might be, right? They're not medically validated, but we have plenty of studies now that show that they have a great approximation to medically validated actigraphy.
So I started throwing that in to research. But I was really focused on cardiovascular disease, cancer, and neurologic disorders.
Okay.
All of those, sleep plays a huge role. So even my interviews for my PhD programs, I gave this talk called Timing is Everything at every school, right? Because it's true, right? I mean, it's an expression and it's catchy, but it's true. Every single cell in every single system in your entire body knows whether you are asleep when you are supposed to be and whether you are awake when you are supposed to be, and whether that's consolidated or all over the place, right?
Wow. And so much so that things like shift work disorder at this point are actually considered a carcinogen, a cancer-causing action. So being a shift worker puts you at higher risk for developing cancers.
So every single nurse, every single offshore worker, every single, this is,
well,
crazy.
And it varies by individual, right? So I was saying earlier, we started to I mean science, right? Not me.
Not just me and Judi. Yeah, we did all of this.
The royal we.
This is why we have a podcast now.
Right.
I love that she said we and said science. I'm not part of that. But yeah, I got you. The we is in smart people, and I get
Meaning
it.
the scientific community,
yes, ma'am.
right?
Yes.
Recognized that there are clock genes and there are genetic factors that play a role in whether you can tolerate shift work, whether you can tolerate an early wake time, whether you are a night owl, right? Or a lark.
A what?
A lark, an early morning person.
Say that again?
An early morning lark. Those are birds.
No, I know I've just never heard it called that. Because I've always been an early bird. Like, I get up ridiculously early.
Well, you're a lark.
You're a lark.
I'm an owl. Come on. I'll be here all week. No, so you're right. But I have so many friends in Southern Louisiana or people I grew up with that are on shift works, or my friends who became doctors, which is so funny because they barely slept for 2 years.
Oh, try doing sleep research. I was, and I was in graduate school. So, I mean, I was staying in the lab late to do all the PSG hookup and then going in early and then reading the studies. And there was no sleeping.
We often joke, see what I just did? We science. No, we in the sleep field often joke, like when we go to these conferences and stuff, here we are promoting sleep. And all of us are not really sleeping all that well.
Yeah. I thought you were saying we, the morning larks.
I am the morning lark. Right. That is going to be, I'm telling you, I'm a lark.
I'm going to get you a
I
shirt.
love that. So thank you. So that's the first thing I thought of too when you were talking about that is that. But now you're saying that there are certain people that can do it and they perform
there are
fine?
people who are at less risk of physiologic consequences.
Okay.
There are people who absolutely cannot tolerate it. They're not trying to be uncooperative. They're not trying to have a different schedule than their bed partner. There are genetic factors, and some people just they have grave difficulty shifting.
So my brother is the lead respiratory therapist at Memorial Hermann in Houston, Texas, Med Center, and he's always done night shift. I work very closely with MD Anderson.
Does he prefer it?
Yes. but he stays on that schedule all the time. His daughters are older, so he's able to stay on that schedule. I have a really good friend who works at MD Anderson Sleep Center. For the last 18 years, he's lived that life overnight. But I have a dear friend, and she just moved to a different state and is working nights. And she would try to measure her schedule to get with her husband and their kids so they could spend time, and then try to do. And it was debilitating, and it affected her marriage. It affected her, I believe her health.
Sure.
For sure.
Hair started falling out, and literally she had to go get a sleep study, and it was ridiculous. And they're telling her, you cannot work. So this is the example. Because she always said, why can't I do that? Why can't I do this? And
So this is the problem with the United States, right? And it's not even just the United States. This is becoming a global problem, right? So we already joked around in 2014 that CDC said
it doesn't matter.
We have a major public health crisis.
Yeah.
There is a stigma, an established stigma around you are weak if you can't get away with less sleep. You are weak if you complain of sleepiness. And the reality is that this is the reason why there are so many people walking around with sleep problems, because of the fact that we wear
and
it as
other
a badge of honor.
problems, right? All these medical problems. So, I'm proud that I need and make time for adequate sleep.
Yes.
I'm not ashamed of it. There's nothing wrong with me.
right.
Also, you implied earlier that you were considerably younger, or that I was younger than you are, and I'm not. And people ask me, what do you do?
Right.
And I say, I get plenty of sleep. I get enough sleep and drink lots of water. You really need to drink
So
lots
that's
of water.
opposite. I probably sleep 4 hours a night and get hammered. I'm just kidding. I know you thought I looked way younger too, but you implied it. No, we were talking earlier, and I think that it's interesting. Ann and I have had so many conversations. We're so excited to start this podcast, and we're honored that you're our first guest. And
I'm honored.
Well, one of the things Ann and I was talking about was kind of the S's, and something that you have a theory on, and I would love to hear about this. And I want you to share with our audience about it.
All right. I would love to.
Is that okay if we jump right into that?
Yeah, let's jump in.
Sure. It is sleeping around the podcast. So
It is sleeping around
So
the
I
podcast.
think that her S's very much fit into.
So I want to hear the S's and teach us, please.
All right.
I want to learn this.
So when I was in training, I was told that, one way you can explain to patients what's called stimulus control, but we won't go into all the kind of technical terms, but that your sleep your bed should be preserved for things that begin with the letter S. So
Wait,
sleep.
on that.
The
on
first
that,
S
on that.
is that it's a sanctuary.
Wait, that's a Prince song, right? Ooh, stimulus control. No, that's not a Prince song?
It might be.
I don't know.
Actually, it's called something control. I'm sorry.
Clip it.
Yep. Go ahead.
All right. So
first S.
you were asking about
Yes,
the
ma'am.
S's,
Yes,
right?
So
All right. So I won't go into all the details of stimulus control, but the principle is that your bed is a sanctuary, right? And the only things that should happen in your bed begin with the letter S, and none of them are snore, and none of them are snack. So
I might have an idea.
sleep and sex. And my mentor told this to me, and I said, I see where you're going with this, but I take it a step further.
Okay.
You should only have satisfying, safe, supported
Oh, 3 S's.
sex in your bed. This is your sanctuary, remember?
Right.
So if you're in a loving, committed, unconditionally accepting relationship, great. You do that in your own bed and fall asleep snuggling afterwards. So you can sleep, sex, snuggle, perfect. Only if you feel safe, secure, and supported. This is your sanctuary. If not, I'm not saying you can't sleep around. I'm not saying you can't have a one-night stand. You just don't bring that into the sanctuary of your bedroom.
Okay. So I will be. Ladies, please help me. So
Are you turning red?
I am.
He's no longer making eye contact with
No.
me, I noticed.
So I travel a lot.
I do too.
Monday. I don't go to Maui. No, I travel all over the flyover states. I'm kidding. But I travel all the time. I'm in a hotel almost every night, every week. I agree with everything you just said. I have a place in Lafayette, Louisiana, and a place in Houston, Texas. And those beds are strictly for sleeping. I'm not being funny. And I'm not going to say, but I will tell you that I have never thought about it until you said it. Until Ann and I talked about it, I was like, that's ingenious. Mm-hmm. And maybe it is because of our age and what we do, but I really mean that. Maybe when I was younger, I would have been like, whatever. But as someone who's single and who has opportunities to do that, I don't even know if I want to do it there. But in my sanctuary, because that's where I love. I mean, my bed, especially in Lafayette, it is awesome. I do zero gravity. So I don't even know if it's built for sex. It hasn't seen any sex. I can tell you that. It's seen a lot of sleep, but I love that. And I think that's such a good message. What I also love is you use some other S's there, supportive, safe. I agree. And I've been down the road. I'm divorced twice. People on the podcast know this. But being in a secure relationship like that, I could see where then it's not, So what you're basically telling our audience and me apparently is don't just have some random come in and out of your bed, because then it won't be your
it's not your sanctuary, right? So so I'm sure you've heard about Pavlov and the dogs, right? So
with the slobber and the food,
right. So this is classical
hold on,
condition.
Pavlov dog with sex?
No, hold on.
No, the analogy.
I'll explain the analogy.
All right, we need to bring this back to PG, maybe PG-13.
That is PG. No, I'm talking about the analogy.
So the principle is
Thank you.
There's classical conditioning. So when we experience things that are associated, we associate them with one another. Mm-hmm. And that means that the emotions that you feel, or the physiologic response, right? Mm-hmm. You ring the bell every time you feed the dogs. Right. They salivate to the bell. Right? So if you feel insecure about your body, if you feel unsure about your relationship, if you're worried the person, if you fall asleep, is going to check your wallet, right? If it's someone you barely know, you take those emotions into your bed, in your own home, in your sanctuary. No, you do not.
Okay.
No, you do not. If you're not sure you're going to feel good about this relationship in the morning, if you're not sure this is the person you want to spend your life with.
So I agree. So what you're saying is have sex on the couch.
Couch, the kitchen, somewhere else.
I mean somewhere else, their house.
Exactly.
Okay.
The reality is, if you think about it, what is this principle based on? When most people come to us and say, I'm having difficulties falling asleep, and you actually ask, well, tell me about what is difficult. What are you doing when you're trying to fall asleep? So number one, that's a problem. No one should ever try, right? Many people will describe that they start ruminating, start thinking all day about everything that has gone wrong. Mm-hmm. If now you're getting into a place that is associated with negative thoughts, where's your mind going, right? Your mind is going to that bad one night stand, or the person you just broke up with, or whatever that might be, right? And that is going to make it really hard for you to fall asleep. So it's limiting the things that are going to provoke developing an insomnia.
Right.
No, and all jokes aside, I've never heard that before. And all this stuff. And when you told me, I was like, that's awesome. Did you come up with that?
So not the sleep and sex, but the only a secure, this is,
it's copyrighted, awesome. Actually. If you Google it, she has a Wikipedia
Judi
page.
Profant.
One night stand. Safe one night stand. No.
Take your one night stand someplace else.
I like that.
Take you're arguing with your spouse someplace else.
Yes.
Take your snack someplace else.
So I've had a theory forever, and I've said this on the podcast. And like I have a history with being married and all that. Mm-hmm. I never had the TV in the bedroom. Oh. Never. One of my marriages, I went out of town, came back, and there's this huge TV in the bedroom. And I went, it can't be. Really? I mean, it's going to make her happy. Cool. It affected me. Hearing the noise. Like I stay in a hotel all the time. The first thing I do in a hotel is turn off the TV.
Turn that thing off, right? They have the ambiance music playing. Yeah. The first thing I do is find that remote and turn it off.
Right.
So I will tell you, it's not just now if it's annoying, that also contributes, right? So there's the emotional experience and the physiology, right? You're activated then. That does not pair well with sleep. But also, so there's changes in light and changes in sound. Mm-hmm. The commercials are 30% louder. Yep. The FCC allows that. Yes, awesome. 30% is the limit. They can't make it more than that. Okay. But and then there's changing levels of light. So our brains are programmed to awaken to signs of danger, right? So loud noises, bright lights, our brains they're created to be
Right. And it always
alerted by that,
incorporates into my
right?
dreams or whatever. Like if she was watching Top Gun, I'm just using an example. Like
Yep.
the sound stuff, and I know I'm not getting that good sleep. I am going to ask about dogs. So I love dogs. I love dogs. I love dogs. That was another hard, fast rule. Even when I had my daughter, nobody in the bed, because it was, and it's unique that I always called my bed the sanctuary. My bedroom was my sanctuary, but, or where I make babies. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But I will tell you that I didn't want a dog in the bed. Like,
so there are two. So if you have no trouble sleeping, so I'm known when I was, in practice and seeing patients all the time, I was known for being what I'd call a realistic clinician. So if there is something that you are absolutely not going to change unless I think it is damaging to your health, then we'd work around it, right? So, and if you don't have difficulty with something, unless I'm concerned that it's really negatively impacting your physiology, right? Even if you're not aware that it's having an emotional impact, then we don't worry about that, right? So if you have no trouble sleeping and you love your dog and you feel well rested and you have tons of energy all day, every day, I'm not going to tell you to get the dog out of the bed. Now, if any part of that is not true, I will tell you why you should consider the dog can be next to the bed, in their own space. Dogs are much, 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 much warmer than we are. And sleep, you want quiet and cool and dark. So dog sleep cycles are far shorter than human sleep cycles are. It varies by breed, so I won't quote a number, but far shorter, less than half.
what's your theory? Do you sleep with a dog?
If it were up to me, no.
Oh.
So this has been a interesting journey with my husband. So when we first met, he actually had just adopted a dog the week before we had met. And in fact, good story is that he almost didn't call me after we first met because he had just adopted this dog. And when he had messaged me 3 days later, which I was like,
That's not a hard, fast rule. Why would you wait?
I don't do the 3-day rule.
Yeah.
I was already I already had written him off, but he sent me this text and he said, "I'm so sorry I haven't messaged. I just adopted a dog and she's been really sick. Do you mind if I call you?" So 2 things got me with that. One, he just adopted a dog and he was taking care. So he had good reason. But the second was that he wanted to call me. I was like, what? You actually want to use the phone and call me?
Speak live.
Yeah, exactly. So this is 2010, right? So we had met on September 13th, 2010. September 10th, 2010 we met. September 13th, 2010.
3 days after.
We had our first date. So he called me. He's like, "Hey, have you eaten dinner?" Now, mind you, I was a first year resident. I was like, "I had yogurt," right? So he came and picked me up. So from that date, we had never been separated. We got married 3 years later on September 13th, 2013.
I got to ask about the dog. Yeah.
Yep, I'm coming back to that. So the dog was sleeping in the bed. And I'm like, I can't do this, right? The dog, it was a blue tick coonhound, not a small dog.
No,
those are big
No,
dogs, right?
wow.
They're big dog. I'm like, they can't. So what he would do is I would obviously leave first thing in the morning and he was still sleeping. He had a terrible delayed sleep phase. He was the person who would go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning and sleep till noon, right? Where I go to bed at 9 and wake up at 4:35. So I would go to the hospital and then a dog would sleep with him. Now, as we
That dog was just waiting for you every morning.
100%.
Yes, for sure.
100%. So now, fast forward, this is almost 13 years later that we're together.
tell me
And and so that dog passed away.
Oh, no,
We have a
sweet.
new dog, okay? And my husband brings it into the bed. She's scared. She needs to be in
Oh
bed.
my gosh.
This dog is no smaller than a blue toucan hound. It's a Rhodesian Ridgeback.
No, those
okay?
are big dogs.
So they're African dogs, right?
Yeah.
That their role in Africa is to treat lions. So they're not small dogs. This dog now sleeps in our bed. And I have tried with all my might, but he has conditioned the dog. You want to talk about
Yes.
Pavlov?
Yeah.
That when she's not in the bed,
Oh no.
so it's either I don't sleep because of
Right.
so many times I'm sleeping in my daughter's bed.
Go ahead.
I have to. This is hilarious, Anne. So we are both morning people, and our husbands are both evening people.
Larks?
We are larks.
We are larks.
and we are married to night owls.
Mm-hmm.
And so when my husband and I first started dating, I had a puppy, and he was like, "Does the dog come in the bedroom?" He said. So I'd have a little talk with my dog and say, "Look, I really like this guy. You're gonna have to sleep out in the living room until he." So he apparently had a dog when he was a child who was, I don't know, mean and bit them and all kinds of. So he was a little leery. He wasn't like
Skittish.
afraid of dogs, but he was
Sure.
leery. So fast forward, she totally won him over. So we were snowboarding up in Mammoth, and it was freezing. Like, we were the first to get to our cabin that year. So, it was so cold. We actually got in, my huge husband and I got in one sleeping bag together, and we're like huddled up in the bunk beds trying to get warm because we had just, turned all the power and everything onto the house. And the dog's over there in her crate, with the door open, just sleeping and, And he leans over, and he's heard me talk about how dogs' circadian rhythms are shorter, and so they can wake you up if they're in the bed, and they're warmer, and so that can disrupt your sleep. And he looks at me, and we are freezing, and he says, "So you promise she's well-trained enough that if you ask her to just sleep on her feet, she'll stay on her feet?" And I said, "Oh, yeah. This dog was in heaven, right?" So she jumps up and I think she stared at him all night. I don't think she slept at all, but she did not move because... It's like she knew if she moved, I'd say, "See,
Y'all
her
must have had a
circadian rhythms."
huge sleeping bag, because you said he's huge. You're in the sleep bag. Dog's on the feet.
Dogs on the feet. Okay. No, we were like shoved into a mummy bag. We were so cold. But it grew from there. Yeah. So same. While I was in bed, she slept in the crate next to us, and then when I'd get up in the morning, she'd jump in the bed.
Oh, that's too funny.
I love that.
To the point where they would like spoon each other.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
Yeah, that's what it is now. So we've established a compromise where she'll stay in the crate for the beginning part of the night. But when I wake up, she comes out of the crate, and there's been mornings where I go to kiss him goodbye, and it's not his face, it's hers, and I'm like, all right, forget it. Good night, goodbye. I'm going to work.
So I knew you were coming on, and I thought, man, what are the questions that I could ask you? Right? Obviously, I'm not that bright. I think we're going to rename the podcast "Sleep Around the Podcast with a Doctor, a Dentist, and a Dummy." I'm just throwing it out there.
I think we should call it the Devoted Sleep Evangelist, right?
Oh, you're pulpit again. Here we go. I was thinking, because we do kind of share the background. I was a therapist for years. Without giving names, obviously without breaking confidentiality, what is there one or two that you could share with us, success stories, or just something that was really wild that you heard that had to do with sleep and how it got solved, or an issue?
Oh, absolutely. I could talk all day.
Well, just pick a couple. I would love for you to share with the audience, because it's so fascinating what you do, and I have researched, and I was just like, there's so many questions I could ask you, but without I just kind of want to throw it out there and open-ended. And
so one of the things that I think people aren't aware of is their environment.
Okay.
So as you said, you came home and there's like a giant TV in the bedroom.
Yeah,
right. So I can talk about one patient in particular who came in and really was desperate for a solution for insomnia, and kept telling me about how challenging his insomnia was, and he'd taken every medication out there, and those, helped for a while, and then they didn't help, and then he couldn't sleep without them, and he really wanted to be off these medications, and so finally, out of desperation, came to a behavioral person. Right. I love how
which
that's
really
always,
should be the opposite,
always our last resort.
So out of desperation, he finally comes to me.
For sure.
But the reality is that we recommend
cognitive
behavioral therapy for insomnia should always come before any medication.
100%.
And even if you're giving a medication, that should still be all
Yes.
in tandem.
Guidelines. It is. Yeah. So we'll go ahead.
Absolutely. So this gentleman comes to see me, and he's an attorney. So he has a high stress job, and sometimes has to, work on briefs late in the evening. So he was having difficulty maintaining, his sleep schedule. And so we worked on all of that. Right. And then he wasn't exercising, and so that can really impact your sleep.
And
if
he's
you,
an attorney, has no soul. I'm just kidding. So
no,
go
he's a
ahead.
super nice guy.
It's okay. I'm kidding.
But so he kept telling me, so we worked on everything. I mean, everything. We had him, doing what's called sleep restriction, where you limit your time in bed. So you're only sleeping during time in bed. And he was doing the stimulus control thing and getting up out of bed anytime he wasn't sleeping. And he just still wasn't sleeping. And I had him, wear a sleep monitoring device, whatever of the era, right? And he had these 2 middle of the night awakenings. And, he wasn't going to bed at exactly the same minute every night. So I was really puzzled by this. Now, an older woman, fine. An older man, maybe you have 2 middle of the night awakenings for,
Right.
genitourinary reasons, right? No, this guy's like in his mid-30s. So, and he'd gotten blackout curtains. He'd done all of these things. So he's showing, I was like, okay, show me, are there lights in your bedroom? Do you have devices plugged in? Is there a fridge nearby that's cycling? Like, what is going on? So he finally showed me, he just happened to show me on his phone a picture of the bedroom and how, there's blackout curtains now and there's no more TV and the alarm clock is turned around and all of these things that we talked about. And he's really keeping, very diligently, what you can control is the time you wake up. He is getting out of bed at the exact same minute, even on the weekends, all of this stuff. So I finally looked closely at this picture and I'm zooming in and there is a grandfather clock. Just out in the hall, not in his bedroom.
Okay.
I was going to say, that's a weird thing to have in your bedroom.
The door is open in this photo, and I can see this gorgeous family heirloom grandfather clock out in the hallway. And I said, so tell me about this clock. And he tells me this whole story. It was his Nana and all of this. Yeah, the clock is going off twice a night. Not playing, they had turned off the chimes. So it wasn't playing the whole,
Like
tunes.
it did like the
Several
cartoon
minute,
where a thing comes out, cock-a-doodle. Okay.
But it just was going through the motions, right? So there's just the clicking noises and all the pendulum adjustments. They had turned off the chimes, but all of the clockwork was engaging twice every night.
And that's where it would.
And he removed the clock, took it into his office where he practices law, and that was it.
Wow.
And so, of course, then he comes to me and says, can the dog come back? And do I have to wake up at the same time? And can I sleep in on weekends? And can I bring the TV back?
I was so hoping, Dan, see if you're with me. I was so hoping you were going to say, I looked around the room and I saw this ridiculously scary baby doll from like the 1920s.
There was an alien.
That wasn't there before. So it wakes him up every night. No, I'm sorry. Okay, have you dealt with anybody who sleepwalks?
Oh, yes.
Give me one. Just one.
Okay, so you talked about the
Night terrors.
Native American reservation.
Yeah.
So when I was in graduate school, I did some work on one of the so I worked. I trained at UCSD, so in San Diego, there are a number of reservations, and I saw a number of Native Americans. And there was a woman who didn't just sleepwalk; she had all kinds of complex parasomnia. So she was driving. She would sleep drive, and would. Thank goodness she was on a reservation because there were wide open roads.
Sure.
And she would get to the edge of the reservation. She even purchased things at like a convenience store.
Whoa.
And drove back. She remembers none of it.
No medicine. So you've heard the stories when people
Sure,
were
taking certain hypnotics and
but
things that would.
she was on no medicine.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, okay. Sorry.
so it was worsened. But she went to a primary care physician who gave her a hypnotic, and that really exacerbated the problem. But she had a history of childhood sleepwalking. And so what resolved it for her, we just really worked through all of, she had some chronic partial sleep deprivation, we call it. So she was not getting adequate sleep.
Right.
Because she was not creating in her life adequate sleep opportunity. So we worked through that. Sleep deprivation absolutely can worsen sleepwalking.
Yes.
But I mean, it was to the point in her home where they had, doors barricaded and
childproof
keys
stuff.
hidden.
They
And
have
Yes.
But
Yes.
once you know the combination and, then those become rote behaviors that can be carried out in sleep.
So by the time they come see you, when she finally came to see you, it had to be a family member or the law or a bit.
No,
How
she
did
was brought by the tribal council.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because you
Because they were concerned about,
right.
Her safety
or
and
others.
the safety of her children and the tribe, right? Wow. Yeah. But it really took getting her on a sleep schedule, and she was working on the reservation and she had a shift work job. So those transitions, you were saying your brother stuck to his schedule.
Yep.
Now that can limit
Always.
your social interaction, right? And your occupational opportunity.
True.
But doing those transitions are really challenging, even for people who do it well.
Wow.
So this woman had rotating shifts, and then she would sleepwalk because she had that sleep deprivation. So it really took getting her off of the hypnotics and really working through all of the behavioral things to regularize her sleep.
It's probably not a fair question, but I'll throw it out there. When you treated her, what is that time frame like? Is that is that something where you go into it with your expertise and go, this is going to take a while, or everybody's different, but how long did it take for her to get that corrected?
So you're right. Everyone is different.
Right.
For most patients with insomnia, 6 to 12 weeks, and then hopefully they don't need to see me anymore, right? Depending how complicated it is and other medical and neurologic, This woman, the whole tribe was invested in her safety
awesome.
and her success. So I think I saw her 8 times total.
Okay.
Probably over the course of 10 weeks or so, because sometimes you want to give something a couple weeks and, there's nothing for me to do in the meantime. But I was thrilled because I thought it might be months. And some people continue to sleepwalk. There's some medications that can help with that, but we'd prefer not to use them. And really your first step is to try to eliminate the factors that worsen sleepwalking.
So I think one of the things that's important, because we probably do have people in the audience who may have a parasomnia. So it's important to first define what is a parasomnia, right? So a parasomnia is basically, when we're talking about non-REM parasomnias, abnormal transitions from what we call our slow wave sleep or non-REM 3 sleep. It's our deepest stage of sleep. It's our restorative stage of sleep, and an abnormal transition to either a lighter stage of sleep or wakefulness. So examples of parasomnias include sleepwalking, sleep eating disorders. There's also sleep sex that can occur, sleep terrors, like you were mentioning earlier. These are all examples of non-REM parasomnias. We most typically are going to see them early in life. Why? Because in childhood, we spend a lot more time in slow wave sleep, right? We spend a lot more time in that non-REM 3 sleep. Why? Again, going back to those circadian patterns, our growth hormone is being developed and being produced in our slow wave sleep. So we spend a lot more time there. As we get older, it becomes less. So if you look statistically, we generally see that parasomnias are going to occur in about 16% of children, adolescents, and that starts to decrease over time. Now, what I would say is that the reason why it's really important to look at all of these behaviors is because when we deprive ourselves of sleep, so you're supposed to get 8 hours of sleep, you're getting 6, 2 hours of sleep less. What happens is our brains are incredibly smart, even without us doing anything. When we actually go to sleep, because we're at a sleep debt, and because slow wave sleep restores sleep debt, what does it do? It rebounds into more slow wave sleep, right? So if you're a person who's genetically prone to a parasomnia, sleep deprivation by itself is going to make you have more events because you're spending more time in slow wave sleep. Now, the inverse is also true. If I have another sleep disorder, I have obstructive sleep apnea, it fragments my sleep. Again, remembering parasomnias are abnormal transitions between slow wave sleep and wakefulness. That then can make me have more of these events. So 100%, we want to look at the behaviors and see, can we augment behaviors that are going to give you a consistent sleep schedule, get you the right number of hours of sleep. Sometimes we'll even use a strategy called strategic awakenings, where we'll actually wake the person right before they'll have the event, because typically it occurs around the same time of the night. But in events like this, we want to make sure, number one, we're giving safety instructions. But very frequently, if I have someone who I'm worried about driving or doing something that they'll get hurt with, I will consider using medications while we're doing this, just to potentially try and help with it. You can use benign things, sometimes melatonin. Again, never using anything unless you talk to your provider first, right? But then other times we may use things like antidepressants, sometimes anti-seizure medications, not because we're trying to treat depression or seizure, but because the way those drugs work help in kind of modulating the likelihood of experiencing that.
I think and when I was kind of studying kind of what you do, Dr. Judi, I looked at it like you work hand in hand with that medicine world, because it's like taking a shower without soap. I mean, they got to have both to truly treat that patient. And so I've always been a fan, obviously, of the behavioral modifications that we can do. One of the things that I was thinking about, and not being funny, so when you have children who wet the bed, for years growing up, they tried different mattresses. They tried, there was shame involved, or there was, and then we found out that it had a lot to do with sleep. And so you dealing with pediatrics and you dealing with this, is there anything, I haven't had a young child in quite some time. Is there newer things out there, or is it behavior mod, or is it? Because I guarantee our audience right now,
there's so many variables there. But I'm gonna let Judi take it first, unless
I'm
you want me
sorry.
to kind of set the stage.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to do.
Did I throw it way too wide?
No.
Okay.
So there's so many things I want to say. There's so many factors that contribute to bedwetting. So I'll start, and then maybe we can just parlay. Yeah. So you had mentioned, so sleep apnea is something that fragments sleep, right? So anything that fragments sleep is going to increase the likelihood of abnormal phenomena during sleep, whether it's a parasomnia or it's something else, right? So our sleep should be consolidated, ideally, right? And so sometimes, Anne had mentioned the planned awakening. So some children, the only intervention needed is a planned awakening if it happens at a certain time. And some kids just, their bladder's not large enough. And you need to not have them dehydrated. And so you need to have a planned awakening and, escort them into the bathroom and take them back to bed. And then they don't wet the bed anymore, right? Okay. Those kids also usually need permission to use the restroom during the school day. If they don't have, a break time and a lunch time that's adequate, or they get excited and they spend their whole recess playing with their friends, and then they didn't go to the restroom, and so that they don't have issues in school as well. Right. So sometimes that's all it takes, and there are all kinds of other things. There are bed alarms, and we can use those. Don't drink something after this time. Empty out your bladder fully. Of course, all of that. Yeah. Right. Okay. Caffeine. Right. So we actually have seen societally an increase in bedwetting in kids, and I think, I don't know, maybe some of it has to do with neurodevelopmental factors, but some of it, we weren't allowed to have caffeine when we were children. There were no, there wasn't caffeine in everything. I agree. Sure. Right. And caffeine is a diuretic, and it's really important to limit those things if kids are having challenges. Yeah. Right. You want to jump in? Yeah, I think some of the things, because especially if people are dealing with children, or maybe even an adult who are having issues with bedwetting. Well, I was going to talk about a 49-year-old, very handsome, bald-headed man that I know. Okay. Yes. Okay. So go ahead. So with bedwetting, it's important to first recognize that we call it in medical terms nocturnal enuresis, right? So bedwetting, that's the medical term. There's primary and secondary nocturnal enuresis. So what does that mean? Primary means I have never had 6 months of time where I was able to stay dry the whole night, right? Secondary nocturnal enuresis is I was dry for a period of time, but then I started bedwetting again, right? So that period of time is 6 months. That's the transition point, right? Okay. So the reason that's first important to recognize is because you're thinking very different things with primary versus secondary, right? So primary, we're generally saying that most children by the age of 8, we usually see bedwetting go away. So societally, we usually kind of give it that 4-year-old age, because they're usually daytime dry, and then 4 to 5, they're usually nighttime dry, not needing any diapers overnight. Right. Those statistics typically are about 8% of 4-year-olds are still bedwetting by the time they get to 8. It
becomes about 4%. So you see that becoming less and less. Now, with primary nocturnal enuresis, that's where we're doing all of these behavioral strategies, limiting what we're drinking before bed, giving the strategic wakening to have them go and void during the night. In very rare cases, we might even use a drug called desmopressin, right? This is an anti-diuretic drug. We use it intranasally. The challenge with that is it works great while you're using it. You stop it, you start bedwetting again.
Yeah.
So there is a big developmental component. Now, when we're looking at secondary nocturnal enuresis, this is when we're starting to say, is there something medical, psychiatric, or otherwise that is producing this? Now, what is fascinating is Judi brought up obstructive sleep apnea. And so many times when people think about obstructive sleep apnea and bedwetting, they think of it purely around the fragmentation. Yes, that's a component of it, but there's actually a physiology that's driving it. So let's break down sleep apnea. What happens when you're having sleep apnea? Okay. Yeah. I am getting stuck in inhalation. What happens in inhalation? I have my apneic or hypopneic event. My lungs are fully expanded. When my lungs are fully expanded, what happens? I have increased venous return, more blood returning to my heart. I have decreased arterial outflow, decreased blood coming out of my heart. What does my heart do? Oh my God, I'm temporarily fluid overloaded. The heart is so smart. It goes, hey, brain, you better pee. We need to get some of this fluid out of here. Yeah. And so when I am recurrently having that, I am making more and more diuretic factors overnight saying you need to pee. In kids, what do we see? I'm peeing to bed. In adults, what do we see? We see the person who's waking up frequently to go to the bathroom. And what do we tell every man? We tell every man, your prostate is too big. Yeah. And so we tell them they all have big prostates and there's nothing you can do. But the reality is that very frequently is a sign of obstructive sleep apnea.
I love that you said that. So my uncle, we won't say how old he is.
Okay.
My uncle was told his prostate was too big. Yep. And then I heard him snore when he came to visit me. And I said, it might just be that your lungs are getting full. Yeah. And he looked at me and I said, I'm just saying, let's treat the apnea and see if we're actually concerned about your prostate.
I'll tell you what, I am fascinated by your background. One of the things I want to say before we wrap up the podcast today is I think it's so important. I'm so blessed to be a father of an 18-year-old daughter. And I've always believed, and if you've watched any of the podcasts, I love it when women support women. Hearing the story about, obviously, that she is talented and very shy and quiet, but you picked her. I think there's something about a mentorship when women promote women. Dr. Ann and I were having a conversation off the record, away from the podcast, just saying it's a shame that not enough women support women. So I want to say that not only am I blessed that now I have a woman sitting beside me for this amazing podcast, but y'all's story, because there's a friendship there. And for you to take time to come be our first guest just shows, again, the special relationship and the bond that you guys have. And I don't want to end this podcast. I would definitely like for you to end on any note that you want, Dr. Ann. But I wanted to say that before we got out of here. So,
well, I have to agree with you. I feel incredibly privileged. Number one, to have the opportunity to use my voice with this podcast, right? I think that is just an incredible opportunity, and I can't have a better partner in it. Now, the second, and probably even more important, sorry, Matt,
it's okay.
Is that I am incredibly grateful that Judi came and was our first guest, because it is really personally very meaningful to me, because she has been instrumental in getting me to where I am right now. And so whether she realized that or not, it meant the world to me for her to be here, because I knew she would be, one, an explosive guest where she was even able to illustrate how important sleeping around is and how it can impact your sleep, right? Yeah. But really because she just is an incredible wealth of knowledge that breaks it down for anyone to be able to understand.
Is there a way we could help promote you, or is there something you want to say where people can find you, or you just do your thing and the drinking wine and hanging out in Maui?
I'm just drinking wine and hanging out in Maui, and I have a day job.
Oh, so you do? Yeah.
I don't need any promotion.
Well, I just want to again say thank you for coming on, and this has been the very first edition of the new edition of Sleeping Around the Podcast. Dan, thank you for showing me the time. Thank you for everything you've done today. Dan put this set together with these two amazing people. I literally just lifted heavy things. I think, right?
Yes.
All right. So in the past, we would cheers and say thank you for sleeping around the podcast, but we're not going to do that now. So I will just say thank you for sleeping around with Dr. Ann and Matthew. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Got it.